Thank you for your patience with some technical difficulties. Today we are doing part two of our transgender member service panel. We call it End the Ban, and this is our portion where we're going to be discussing some of the more nuanced issues regarding the actual policy that is in place currently. And we have three amazing panelists with us, and I want to thank them for joining us. Really appreciate you giving us some of your time. We're excited to have this. This is the kickoff for Transgender Awareness Week. This week is really important, and it culminates on Friday with the Transgender Day of Remembrance. It's an international day to remember those that we have lost because of transphobia and violence associated with that. So it's very important to the community that we're part of, and we want to make that statement before we do anything. That is what this is about. We are remembering our siblings that are no longer with us because of bigotry and hatred that is very pervasive in our society, and it still exists within the Coast Guard. So that's why we're here. Today I will be moderating with my counterpart, Derek Smith, who is also with us. Thank you to him for some very helpful logistics planning this whole event. This is a two-part thing, and we're on the last little bit here, so I'm very grateful for Derek and all the work that he has put into making sure that these are a success. So excited about that. A couple housekeeping things. Again, I already said it before, but I want to say it one more time. Cameras off and muted unless you are a panelist. If you are a panelist, when you're not speaking, it might be helpful to mute just so that way we don't get any sort of feedback. And then if you are able to put captions on, and that is by going to the three dots on the little toolbar and hitting more options, and then all you have to do is turn on live captions. So I'm going to do that for myself, so that way the video recording has captions, but you're also able to do that if that is something that you desire or require. Again, I want to thank our special guests for joining us, being willing to have an authentic conversation for the benefit of everyone who's going to be watching this. I think it's really important to be able to discuss these topics openly, genuinely, and authentically. That's something that we take pride in Coast Guard Spectrum, is having authentic conversations. The first part of this panel is going to be a moderated question and answer time, followed then by an open Q&A session using questions from the audience. So if you're in the audience and you're watching this and you have questions for any of the panel members, please feel free to put those in the chat. Our other Spectrum members who are on the call, and thank you to them for being here behind the scenes, are going to be looking at those questions and figuring out which are the ones that we want to ask and get answered with the time that we have left after the moderated Q&A portion. So the first part of this is I'm going to read a short bio on each of our honored guests, and then we will get going. So Aaron Belkin. Since 1999, Aaron Belkin has served as the founding director of Palm Center, which the Advocate named as one of the most effective LGBTQ rights organizations in the nation. Harvard Law professor Janet Haley said of Belkin that probably no single person deserves more credit for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. During a November 2016 White House ceremony, the senior DoD official credited the Palm Center as one of the organizations most responsible for helping the military lift its ban on transgender personnel. We also have Blake Dremen. Blake Dremen was a lieutenant commander in 2003, graduate from Ozark Christian College, earning a Bachelor of Biblical Literature, and graduated with a Master's of Business Administration from Norwich University in June of 2019. Blake has completed 11 deployments. Those included 4 on board USS Denver, 5 patrols as a supply officer on USS Maine, and he completed 1 deployment with the Army to Afghanistan. He is currently assigned to the audit officer as the Navy Ammunition Command in, I'm going to mess this city up, but Mechanicsburg, hopefully that's correct, Pennsylvania, since March 2020. He was selected for promotion to commander in September of 2020. Congratulations, Commander. Blake's personal decorations include 2 Defense Meritorious Service Medals, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, the Joint Service Achievement Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal, and 4 Navy Achievement Medals. He's a 2015 recipient of the Vice Admiral Robert F. Batchelder Award, the Navy's highest logistics award. In 2018, he received the Department of Defense Pride Military Leadership Award, and in 2019, he was named one of the top 25 LGBTQ next generation leaders to watch by out in national security. Blake was one of the 5 transgender service members who testified to Congress against the ban in February of 2019 and completed his term as president of Sparta, a transgender military advocacy organization focused on supporting transgender service members and reversing the reinstated ban. He remains on the board as chief financial officer. Rear Admiral Alan M. Steinman was commissioned in the United States Public Health Service as lieutenant in July of 1972, commencing a military career of over 25 years in the United States Coast Guard and in public health service. His educational degrees include a Bachelor of Science in 1996 from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a Doctor of Medicine in 1971 from Stanford University School of Medicine, and a Master of Public Health in 1986 from the University of Washington. His first postgraduate year was at the Mayo Graduate School of Medicine in Rochester, Minnesota in 1971. Rear Admiral Steinman graduated from the U.S. Navy School of Aerospace Medicine, where he earned the designation of U.S. Navy Flight Surgeon in 1973. He currently serves as a consultant in cold weather medicine and holds the position of professional affiliate with the Health, Leisure, and Human Performance Research Institute at the University of Manitoba. He is the co-author of 2 major reports on transgender military service, including the report of the Transgender Military Service Commission, March of 2014, and DoD's rationale for reinstating the transgender ban is contradicted by evidence, April of 2018. Rear Admiral Alan Steinman is the most senior military officer to self-identify as gay after his retirement. His service on the Military Advisory Council for Service Members Legal Defense Network, and as the advisor for Service Members United, Service Women's Action Network, and the Palm Center. He is also a founding member of the Puget Sound chapter of American Veterans for Equal Rights. He was selected to brief President-elect Obama's transition team on the issue of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He also met with senior members of the Pentagon's working group on gays in the military, and he was invited by the White House to attend a presidential signing ceremony repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell statute. He lives with his adopted son and husband in Olympia, Washington. So those are the formal bios, and I really appreciate the level of expertise that we have on this panel to discuss this subject. I think it's very impressive, and I think we could not have 3 better people to actually discuss this issue. I'd like to now ask each of our panelists to give us just a brief 3 to 5 minute history on their role in this fight, starting with Admiral Steinman.
Well, I'll probably make it briefer than 5 minutes, I hope. As you just heard, I retired from the Coast Guard in 1997, where I was the Director of Health and Safety, which I think is now called the Director of Health, Safety, and Work Life, I think. I came out publicly in 2003 on the 10th anniversary of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, along with 2 Army generals, in order to make a statement that gays and lesbians and bisexuals are at all levels of the military and are serving with honor, and it shouldn't be a problem to repeal that law. I started working with SLDN on their honorary board of directors. At that time, I was part of the Call to Duty tour for Service Members United between 2005 and 2006, in which we traveled around the country, focusing mainly on red states, trying to change hearts and minds about the Don't Ask, Don't Tell issue, traveling with gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members. And I've been working with Dr. Belkin in the Palm Center ever since I came out. And I just, parenthetically, I think on the issue of transgender, Dr. Belkin is probably the smartest person in the country, the most knowledgeable on the transgender and the military issue. With Dr. Belkin, I co-authored several papers on the issues of transgender in the military. And of importance, and this was one of Dr. Belkin's initiatives, I presented to the American Medical Association, trying to convince them to endorse lifting the ban, and ultimately they did so. And that was one of Aaron's major ideas, is to focus on the medical aspects of this. And I think it was a very successful strategy, and it was very helpful to have the AMA come out on our side. And so I will turn the mic back over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Admiral. We appreciate that. And thank you for your dedication to fighting for people's rights when it was not easy. And I would like to now turn it over to Blake to do the same.
Hey Caleb, thanks for the intro, and I'm gonna echo Admiral Steinman here in that Aaron provides the data and the medical, and Sparta provides the stories that show everything that he says works, right? So I've been involved with the fight since 2015 when I first moved back to Washington D.C. I was stationed at the Pentagon at the time, and it gave me great access to be able to talk to senior leaders because I was on the Joint Staff. So, if they had questions and things like that, we could work out meetings to go in there and bring service members to make sure that whatever data Aaron was bringing we brought the stories that showed we were already serving and doing the things that we were saying was already possible. So I was in the Pentagon from 2015, 2017, and then 2017, 2020, I was at DLA just down the road, doing the same thing, right? Leading Sparta from there after the ban was first repealed, and then leading Sparta when the ban was reinstated, and again putting those stories out there, getting service members in front of the media so we could show them that, hey, we're serving, we're doing well, we're deploying, we're doing all those things, and then working with our partners in Congress to put those stories in the hands of members there to help possibly do a legislative thing while we were under the current administration. We shouldn't need we'll still need to keep putting those stories out there, but that's kind of where my role has always been, is finding the stories and showing that everything that we're doing is that we have service members who are doing the job, serving their country with dignity and honor, and keeping to do so despite everything that we try to do to either limit them or kick them out.
Thank you so much, Blake. Appreciate that. Aaron?
Yeah, thank you so much to Caleb and Derek for organizing the session and for the opportunity to talk with you and learn from you. And it's such an honor also to be on the same panel with Admiral Steinman, with Al, and Commander Drennan with Blake, both of whom have been just incredible allies for years. What Blake said is absolutely true. If it hadn't been for Sparta illustrating in a very concrete way that trans service members can serve and promote readiness and fulfill their mission, it never would have been possible to change the policy. And Al, when Al came out and acknowledged his sexual orientation in the New York Times, by the way, that was a turning point on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. No one had ever done that, and he and two other retired general officers said that they were gay, and it really changed the whole debate. And him doing that is what made it possible for the late chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Shalikashvili, to say in the New York Times that he was wrong about gays and lesbians in the military and that Don't Ask, Don't Tell should be repealed. I will say briefly about my own history. So I founded the Palm Center almost 22 years ago, and when I started the Palm Center, as I saw it, the problem was that folks in favor of discrimination were arguing that gays and lesbians hurt the military. And folks on our side were responding with a democracy argument. That's unfair. Discrimination is undemocratic. It's inconsistent with our values. And the problem, as I saw it, was that we needed to fight fire with fire and use the military readiness arguments to subvert Don't Ask, Don't Tell, rather than caving on that argument and trying to overcome that argument with a values argument. And the reason is because as long as the generals and admirals could claim with a straight face that gays and lesbians and bisexuals undermined cohesion, it was never going to be possible for judges or litigators or lobbyists to push the policy across the line. And so 3 or 4 times a year for about 10 years, it wasn't just doing the research, but it was getting national media headlines about the research. New York Times story, front page, new study, gays and lesbians in the British military, a success. CNN, international news. Arabic linguists fired for being gay. So we did that 3 or 4 times for about a decade to change the conversation and make it all but impossible to claim that gays and lesbians undermine the military. And that opened up a space for other groups in the community to do tremendous work, changing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And on trans policy, it was a similar move, but the lie that had to be disabled was a different lie. So in the case of the transgender ban, the rationale for the lie at first was not really about trans service members undermining cohesion, but it was a medical rationale that, you know, we in the military couldn't possibly figure out how to provide transition-related care. And so our first step in combating that was to commission a study with Admiral Steinman, who was the Surgeon General equivalent of the Coast Guard, so the highest medical officer in the Coast Guard, and a former U.S. Surgeon General, Jocelyn Elders, who published a careful study showing that every aspect of the medical rationale for discrimination was wrong. Cisgender troops take the same hormones that trans troops would need. Cisgender service members receive the same surgeries that transgender troops would need. Same with all other aspects of the medical rationale. And the point of that study was not just to do a study for the library shelf, but we got a New York Times editorial about that study. And then 2 days later, Secretary Hagel announced for the first time in history that he would review the transgender ban. And so the strategy was really about using research to move public opinion via media headlines. And I'm honored that we're still chugging along. And when President-elect Biden comes back, we will get inclusive policy restored. So thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you, and I look forward to Q&A.
Thank you very much, Aaron. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate all three of you being here. Before we really get into this, the meat of the discussion here, I want to just ask, and I'm going to ask Blake to potentially just help us out so everyone's on the same page in terms of right now, today, where are transgender rights within the military, and what does the current policy actually detail?
So this is where, so they carved out some special places for this, right? So they made it simple but complicated. They said, okay, you can identify as transgender, but you can't medically transition without risking discharge. Now, based on our understanding of the numbers, as of right now, there have been very few people that have actually been discharged under the current ban, mainly because they've all applied for waivers, and the waivers get stuck somewhere and they don't actually approve any of them. Now, there have been a few. There have definitely been a few, and part of that is those people that wanted to get out, right, immediately without putting in a waiver. So there are 2 tiers of transgender people in the military. There are those that are exempt and those that are non-exempt. The exempt personnel still fall under the 2016 policy that is ever evolving into more and more restrictions based on the fact that the medical community is currently supporting continued restrictions because they can under the current administration, at least on deployments and various things like that. And then there are the non-exempt who are allowed to identify as transgender as long as they don't medically transition, which in general means that if you identify as transgender and you get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, that you would need to medically transition. So those that do are now, they're putting in what they would call a waiver to bring them under the exempt status. There's been one waiver approved, and it was through a lawsuit in 2019. And then we've had several others that are sitting up at the SecNav. I think the SecNav is the only one that has any that's actually there. I don't think anybody's ever has gotten anything past their secretary's office yet, and I think partially because by the time they got there, it's just too close to the election. Nobody wants to sign off on any of those yet. And so you have 2 tiers. You you have one half of the or you have this portion of the population that says you're unfit, we need to kick you out, but you're allowed to apply for a waiver. We have the other part of the population of transgender service members that says you're unfit, but we're going to be nice to you and keep you around because we exempted you. So that's where the policy stands at the moment. And as we said, transgender service members are continuing to serve each and every day with all their abilities and trying to deploy, despite the best efforts of some of our senior military medical officers in trying to not let them do so.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's an overwhelming amount of confusion in general, specifically when it comes to what can be done and what can't be done, and especially on the side of supervisors who may not actually have this policy directly affect them, but are affected by members who they're in charge of, who are trying to figure out this process. So,
and one thing we've learned about anything, the one thing you don't want in military policy is confusion.
Right.
And all we've done with the back and the forth and all throughout this thing is confuse the policy to where you have what I would consider in military decision making or in decision making in any way, shape, form, just a frozen senior leader. They don't want to get in trouble, but they don't want to, let the service member down, and so they go back and forth and they just don't do anything, which is where a lot of our waivers get put, because there's no waiver process for a lot of these things, at least not that they've made publicly available, so they just don't do anything. And so once we get everything said and done and the new administration can come in, we can set the policy so that we have one policy that everybody knows is the policy, and we can start rooting out those that decide that they just don't want to follow the policy.
Yep. Thank you very much for that information. I'm going to turn it over to Derek to begin the actual moderated Q&A portion.
Great. Thanks, Caleb, and thanks our three panelists for being here today. Also, as a reminder, if you do have questions that are coming up right now, feel free to put those in the chat. Like Caleb said in the beginning, we do have our other Spectrum team members in the background collecting all those. So the first question is going to be for Aaron. You spoke about the Palm Center and founding it, and this idea of using research to shift the narrative. Currently, what are some research topics, or what kind of research are you doing at the Palm Center in regards to the transgender ban, and how are you using that data now to kind of help with this reversal? How did that influence the memo that the Palm Center produced in regards to changing the ban?
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're about to release a study showing that the Trump ban has harmed military readiness by undermining pretty much every dimension of readiness, access to medical care, unit cohesion, recruitment, retention, morale, good order and discipline. And so we will provide those data to journalists and to allies, well, not just to allies, but to everyone in Congress. And we will hope that those, well, I should say, President Trump forced the military to reinstitute the ban because he asserted that that inclusive policy was harming readiness. But no one ever assessed whether the ban that he put into place would actually cause the problems that it was designed to administer. So we went in open. If we find evidence that's inconsistent with our political beliefs, we always report that. But we didn't find any. We just found that the ban itself harms the military. So we'll put out that report soon as part of the process of informing public opinion about the policy. I would also say we did a research memo that we released about 2 months ago that showed that for all the reasons that Blake just described, the new administration, it was framed in terms of a future administration. So whether that Biden or 4 years from now or 8 years from now, but a future administration could restore inclusive policy literally with the snap of a finger. And I'll just explain briefly what we were doing with that one. So I think typically when the military implements new personnel policy, there's a 6 to 12 month period of study, policy formulation, and deliberation. That's a good thing. In this case, there's no need for policy formulation or deliberation or study because, as Blake explained, inclusive policy, good inclusive policy, gold standard inclusive policy remains on the books today. It's in effect to handle and manage grandfathered service members, exempt service members who are exempt from the Trump ban. So literally all the military has to do is cancel the Trump ban, which just requires an eraser. And we published that study. Really honored that 9 very important groups endorsed the findings in that study, including Sparta and HRC and CAP and MMAA. And then we got a New York Times article written about that study. And the purpose was we wrote it before the election, was that if the administration was to change hands, we wanted to be sure that the transition team, the Defense Department transition team, would understand that it's a non-starter to spend months, if not years, slow rolling the implementation of inclusive policy, that they need to do it immediately. And there's no administrative excuse for not doing so.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Quick follow-up then. What does the timeline look like then, as far as you're saying this could be a quick turnaround? Do you have kind of a timeline?
We don't know, and it would be really good to hear from Blake as to what he's hearing internally. And the transition team, of course, is just getting its footing. But what I can say is that President-elect Biden pledged in print to instruct the Pentagon to restore inclusive policy on day one. So I would not be surprised if he instructs the Pentagon to do so. And then there will be a process at the Pentagon to actually get rid of the Trump ban. If that process is anything beyond immediate, I'm very confident that senior allies in Congress will be calling the new Secretary of Defense and telling that person to move it, and that there will be mounting media pressure. So I would expect policy to move quickly. There's a separate question of surgery for dependents and family members through TRICARE, of surgery for veterans through the VA, and of inclusive service for non-binary troops. Those are all, and actually for DSD, intersex service members, those are all questions that need to be dealt with later. But as for inclusive policy for trans troops, as developed by Secretary of Defense Carter, that should come back immediately. And we will not let up the pressure until it's restored. Some of the groups made a mistake in 2009 and took Obama at his word and took their foot off the gas when he came into office because they thought he would just go ahead and repeal the policy. And we are not in an allied position with the new administration as outsiders. I'm not speaking for Sparta. We are in a position of holding them accountable until they do what they said they're going to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Caleb, over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. I think that's a great point, talking about accountability and, being to the point of maybe annoying. We're trying to really just be a constant bug in people's ears that this is what needs to happen. It needs to happen quickly, and you need to do what you say when you pledge that you're going to do something for a group of people that are constantly marginalized within society. So thank you for that. And actually, you kind of touched on with the second question. This question is going to go over to Blake. But in terms of the current policy right now, this is a 2-part question. How does it affect non-binary service members? And then the follow-up is, how do you see a path to creating gender-neutral ideals within the military that is so focused on this binary version of gender? And how do we move to a direction that's inclusive for people of all genders?
So that's a great question, and one that we discussed earlier as you invited me on this panel. So as you said, the military is very binary, very much male, female. We are moving in a direction to where more and more states are allowing people to identify as non-binary and changing documentations to include X gender markers and things like that. We aren't there yet with the military. However, it is not impossible for non-binary troops to currently serve. They do have to pick a box. but they can start doing whatever it is that they need to do to feel like they are in their particular their gender expression. So most of the services, with the exception of the Army, allow for exceptions to policy for grooming in uniforms and things like that, so that they can identify with portions of the opposite sex while still maintaining their current biological gender. Now, like I said, they still have to pick a box, and they will have to do dress uniforms. The majority of uniforms in the military are gender neutral already, with the exception of dress uniforms generally. And I don't see those gendered uniforms going away anytime soon, at least not with the Navy or with any of those, because I know Secretary of the Navy, the previous one, whose name escapes me at the moment, was very much into getting everybody into gender neutral uniforms, and met some serious backlash from female service members regarding the move to gender neutral uniforms. So we're not there yet. We're headed in that direction. Like the Air Force and the new Space Force are already, their uniforms are generally fairly the same already, including their dress uniforms. But we're not there yet. The Army is moving towards a gender neutral PT test. The other services aren't there yet. So we're still getting everybody used to the idea that one can move from box A to box B, or from box B to box A. Getting everybody to get to the idea that they can pick a third box that's neither. We're still massaging that, but it is totally possible for a non-binary troop to serve, as long as they're willing to, kind of be a little bit more flexible for the time being, and they can move in those medical terms, move forward in many ways. But as far as being able to kind of be neither, we're not there yet. And I would give it probably a good another 10 years before we're completely there. And that's me being extremely conservative. We could get there sooner than that. But like I said, we're still getting everybody used to moving from box A to box B, or box B to box A. Once we can kind of get a little bit more on board with that, we can start moving from box B to X, right? So we're still working on that. We do have several non-binary service members that are in Sparta and are learning to navigate the medical community, and we're moving in that direction. But again, we're still not quite there yet.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Blake. One thing, kind of following up, one of the things that Spectrum is, we put together our 2021 basically goals and demands for the Coast Guard in general. And one of the things that we discussed was implementing gender neutral language in all policy across the board, and changing policy so that it reflects gender neutral language. That seems like a small ask, but it's also, as someone who has been working in policy for the last year and a half, understanding that that's a bigger ask than may seem at the face. But is that something that we can potentially across services implement as a step to more inclusive gender language?
So yes, that's possible. So you have to take into several things into consideration. So again, the Navy tried this with their rating systems, right? We tried to get rid of things like yeoman and bosun's mate, and go to kind of a more of an Army type centric rating system with numbers, and it was a big PR flop. So you have to take into consideration some of the like which publications and which words are you looking to change, and which battles to choose on that, and whether or not you're battling the gender neutral language or you're battling tradition, because gender neutral language you can fix. tradition is going to be a little bit harder to get past. So changing things like yeoman or air crewman or something like that is going to be a little bit more difficult to get people behind. But if you want to use more gender neutral language, again, you have to also approach that in the sense that there are a lot of cisgender service members that take very good pride in the fact that they're female service members or that they're male service members, and they don't necessarily appreciate that, right? So it's not a matter of, is it the right thing to do? It's a matter of convincing people not only that it's the right thing to do, but that they can do it, and it's not gonna, they're not gonna blow their minds, right? So my thing is, you have to convince people in power that it's right to do it. Then you have to convince them to take action. And then you have to convince them to take the right action. And then you have to start all over because they're probably going to screw it up the first time anyways. And you're going to need to redo it again. So like I said, pick your battles, which publications and which asks are you making? And then, start to move that line as you go. You're not going to be able to win it all in one fell swoop.
Yep. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that insight. I'm going to pass it back over to Derek.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake. I think it was really good perspective on the gender neutral uniforms, your everyday uniform being gender neutral. That's great perspective for people to think about when they're thinking about these things. And I think for dress uniforms, hopefully someday we can maybe even just get to an option where there is a third option where you can still, if you're a female, wear your female dress uniform. But if you want, hopefully we can get to a point where you can maybe choose this other option, or if you're male, same. So Admiral, great to see you again, sir. Just for background, this spring I had a discussion with Admiral Steinman, and you can see that on our website and get some more background on the Don't Ask, Don't Tell fight and his experience with that. I definitely suggest going and checking that out. Sir, in the memo that Aaron talked about, you identify four key points, basically, or four key pieces of policy that can be changed. Can you touch on those four pieces of policy for us and maybe give us some explanation on how they work, what they are, and the nuts and bolts of it?
I'm going to have to go find that first before I do that in the memo. Sorry. Where is this? I'm sorry. You caught me unprepared, I'm afraid.
No worries. I have them right here. All right. So the first one you have is the military service by transgender persons and persons with gender dysphoria, DODI 1300.28. That is the one. There was a version issued just recently in September.
May I interrupt?
Yeah.
And I think it's very important for Admiral Steinman to address this, but I'm not sure how helpful it would be to go regulation through regulation. The point of Admiral Steinman's memo, as I understand it, was just that there's a little bit of language here and there in various military regulations that composes the ban. Just rip that out. And if you want details on that, just go to the appendix. It's literally a one-pager. So Al, if you wanted to say more on that, please, of course, go ahead. But I just wanted to underscore that it's really in the weeds to ask for like which kind of sentence and which regulation needs to be changed. But the big point is just that all you need is an eraser. You don't need to formulate new policy. So sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you.
No, that's good. And let me just amplify something that we've been talking about almost this whole hour, particularly with what Blake has expressed from his experience inside the Pentagon and talking about policy changes. And one big picture thing we have to consider always is, where is the American population on this issue? The military is a reflection of that. And so you always have to keep in mind when we're talking about transgender, what does the American population think of this? And I think we still have a huge educational piece to convince the public that what we're doing in the military is okay and it's not going to be harmful. And of course, that is immediately reflected in whether Congress is going to go along with what we want to do in the military on this issue. But so when we talk about changing mindsets, we have to be mindful that we have to change hearts and minds out there beyond the military boundaries, or we're not going to be successful. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is on this issue, as it was in Don't Ask, Don't Tell, is that the huge power of the chaplain corps inside the military. And it's been a major problem from day one on both gays and lesbians and bisexual serving, and certainly on the transgender issue. And so we have to be mindful of their influence on policy inside the Pentagon. And it's usually trouble. Blake, do you have any more comments on the chaplain corps and what their influence is on trans in the military?
Oh, chaplains. I love chaplains. Chaplains do great things, and then there are some days where chaplains do horrible things. And in this particular case, at least the urban legend, one that we haven't been quite able to publicly prove, is that the trans ban comes from a conversation with two very conservative chaplains with Vice President Pence, and them convincing then that they needed to get rid of this policy, and then the president got too bored waiting for them to implement it legally, so he just tweeted it out. So chaplains have a lot of influence in the current administration. I don't know how much influence they're going to have in the next administration. At least definitely not to the same extent that they do now. But chaplains, the majority of chaplains belong to very conservative, fundamentalist, religious organizations, and they hold a lot of political power. Hence why, you had the Vicky Hartzlers trying to pass bans on transgender healthcare in the NDAA before the tweets, right? So those types of people have, those types of people are the ones that are whispering in politicians' ears, to say the least. The number of left-leaning chaplains is a handful. So, and with our military being, I won't say very religious, but your high-ranking folks are very religious, right? The majority of folks that are coming into the military fall into as they would call the nuns, right? They're not as religiously conservative as they were 30 years ago, but there's still a good portion of them that they've never met a gay person. You could have people that have never met a person of color. You could still, you still have a lot of those types of folks coming to the military. But they learn quick, if they want to fit in. So, but the chaplain corps still is very, and they view the military as their mission field, and they will do what they do. So it is all about reducing the influence chaplain corps has on the senior military folks and the Oval Office. And I think the new administration, while Biden is a very, very Catholic, he's not as, he doesn't tend to listen to the chaplain corps as part of his military strategy, unlike the vice president.
I do want to also follow up and just say, I think that's great points, and I appreciate that insight on the chaplain corps. We do have, and I think it's also, to add to that, you need to also have chaplains who are aligning with versions of their selected religions that are inclusive. Because if you start to include, folks that are able to move into those more love-centric, inclusive versions of religion, then a little bit of this specific pain goes away. I know we have a Coast Guard Spectrum member who is one of the chaplains in one of the areas of the Coast Guard, and so I know that she is doing great work out there. So it's also just getting good people on board as well.
Well, Caleb, and I'll ask you this: what is the reason why we can't bring in some of those chaplains? Do you know kind of what that is? Why we don't have a lot of left-leaning chaplains?
I don't. No, you please illuminate.
Well, the majority of left-leaning religions are pacifist, right? So joining the military would be kind of in contradiction to their religious beliefs. Now, that's not to say all of them are, but because they understand that there are larger things that are going into that. But it's also very, very important to understand that those fundamentalist chaplains believe that the military will bring about the the rapture and the revelations and everything else like that, whereas our other folks, that's not part of their belief system. So it's a little bit more difficult to recruit those kinds of folks.
Absolutely. But we're going to hope, because that is why we're here, is to hope that we will get the people that love and believe all people are valid in positions where it matters. Derek, you want to ask one more question? I think we have an audience question that we're going to ask, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, we have a question from Lieutenant Commander Hale Allegretti. Blake, you talked about frozen senior leadership who have opted to take no action under the current administration. For those of us lucky enough and who have served long enough to have been impacted by both Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the transgender service ban, how does the service begin to rebuild trust with these members and all those who have been impacted by these discriminatory policies?
Ooh, that's a heavy question. I'm not sure that's so. Here's my philosophy of leadership within the military. A lot of times you're going to come across a bad leader, because the military encourages mediocrity in many ways. Because good leaders get out, and so because they can't deal with the bureaucracy anymore. So many times you have to take into account that either you or them will move on, as far as leaders are concerned. I tell junior folks never base their experience on their first command, because again, leaders come and go, and you're going to come across hopefully a better leader on the next time around. And you'll just have to, well, you don't have to, you do have to make the decision. Can you rebuild that trust? Can you, as the service member, rebuild that trust? Because it's not going to, the leader himself, he don't care. If he's stopped at that point, he doesn't care. You have to make the decision on whether or not you want to continue. And make that choice to say, do I want to stay and continue to try and make this better, or do I want to get out and work for other things to make my life better? Right? It's a very personal decision, and I'm not sure that we can expect the services to work to rebuild that trust, because they're going to try and cut the line and say, okay, we're a new administration, trust us. They're not necessarily gonna work to try and rebuild the trust of the service members, especially those of us who served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or especially this trans ban, where we served for a year of getting it, and then it got ripped out from under us, under a different administration. So I'm not sure that you're going to be able to necessarily rebuild that trust without just staying in and working to make it better yourself, or deciding that you need to move on to do other things. And there's no shame in that whatsoever.
Thanks for that answer, Blake. I think that that kind of speaks to the work that we're doing in both Sparta and CG Spectrum. I think, we both have groups made up of service members who are deciding to, make this a better place than they found it. I know that that's my goal and Caleb's goal, at least, and the rest of our board members. So I do appreciate that answer there. It looks like we only have a few more minutes left. Caleb, do you?
Yep. So, and I also want to just throw in there, it's been a long-standing, unfortunate tradition that we heal ourselves, right? Like the powers that be aren't going to do it for us, and that is how all of these organizations have started, and that is how rights activism continues is those that it affects are the loudest voices, and that's not the way it should be, but it is unfortunately where we're at right now. So I think that that's a great point, Blake, that it's really up to us to kind of come around our people who have been affected by this so harshly, and create those communities. That is the purpose of why we are here at Coast Guard Spectrum, is to reiterate that everyone is valid. So to close this out, I do want to just ask one final question, and I'll open it up to all panelists, maybe starting with Admiral. And it is, how can anyone, allies, queer members, senior leaders within these organizations, how can they show support for this community, and how can they get involved in this fight for equal rights?
Well, I think organizations such as Spectrum play a huge role in this, and I couldn't be prouder of the Coast Guard for standing behind your organization. So I think having people tell their stories, joining this organization, supporting them in every way you can, and speaking out publicly in favor of transgender military people is incredibly important. Plus, talking to your family members and friends and explaining what it means to be transgender or non-binary. I think most of the public still needs to be educated a lot on that issue, and so I think that's probably the biggest role we can play.
Thank you, Admiral. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
I'll say a word. Just adding to what Al just said, and I can't speak for other people in the movement, but I'll say for me personally, and probably for a lot of others of us who've been actually fighting even before I was, there have been LGBT service members fighting for equality. And I'm not a service member, but LGBT service members and advocates fighting for equality going back more than a generation. And I think a big part of the reason why I was fighting and they were fighting was exactly for groups like CG Spectrum to be able to exist and for Sparta to be able to exist. So when I see you thriving, when I see Sparta thriving, it means so much to me, because that means that the work of all of these advocates has succeeded, even though we're going through some policy ripples now with the trans ban. So I just want to thank you, Derek and Caleb, so much, and it's just really an honor to be on this panel with Alan, Blake, and with you.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
And I'll close it out. The best thing that I found is to share the stories that you find of transgender service members, of transgender people, whether it's from your local advocacy groups or your local LGBT center that's sharing stories, or sharing Sparta stories, or sharing any stories that you can find. The one thing that we found that changes hearts and minds very, very well, in addition to the data, is that you take both the story and the data and you combine the two, and it moves mountains. So sharing the stories that you find of people, talking to them about Transgender Day of Remembrance and why we're doing this, because there are 37 or 38 transgender people, and mostly transgender women of color, who've been killed over the last year, and mostly all of them in acts of violence, or the stories of people who we've lost to suicide, not because they were transgender, but because of the bullying and harassment and lack of acceptance that they've been shown in the world that they live in. Just those types of things. You show them both the data that says, hey, this is what fixes it, and then you share the story of someone that you've lost or saved because of what happens there. So those are the types of things that I think people can do in regards to showing their support. Besides write your congress member, write your congressperson, call your congressman, write the DOD. They take letters just like everybody else. So see where the policy shifts have gone. Moved from 50% to almost 70. We're still close to 70% on acceptance of transgender service members being able to serve in the military across the public, and we're over 50% within active duty military. So, and that comes from, sharing those stories and seeing people do what we do every day.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Blake. And thank you to Aaron and Admiral Steinman. So happy all three of you could make it here today. You're just absolute joys to chat with, and such great information there. If you're interested in learning more about Sparta, we will attach the link to their site when we post this recording on our website, coastguardspectrum.com. Also, it'll be on our Facebook page as well, so that you can get to their site and get some more information. Also, I just want to reiterate, Blake touched on it just now, 20th is Transgender Day of Remembrance. This year is the deadliest year in the past 4 or 5 for transgender people in America. He stated the number. Those are just the number of victims that we know. Oftentimes, people get misreported, misgendered, dead named in the media, in their police reports, by their families, etc. So the number is unfortunately likely much higher than that. So that is something that we want you to take with you, is that this is a serious issue outside of just the military. This is affecting all parts of society. So once again, thank you to the three of you for being here today. Caleb, over to you.
Thanks, Derek. And yeah, thank you so much, Admiral, Blake, and Aaron, for giving us some insight into some of the really important work that is being done by your respective organizations. And we're grateful because, and we're happy to partner with you on this, because I think how we achieve our goals is by working as a collective queer unit to dismantle the oppression. And that is what we're here to do. And I said it in the last panel, and I want to say it again. For anyone that is out there who is struggling, Coast Guard Spectrum, Sparta, the Palm Center, these are places, these are organizations that are here for you. But specifically with Coast Guard Spectrum, that is why we are here. We are here to be a resource center for anyone that wants to be part of this movement. So we thank you for your time. I again want to just thank our panelists for their time, invaluable information, and wonderful chatting. And we really appreciate it. And please continue to keep your transgender siblings in your mind this week and past this week, but especially on the 20th for Trans Day of Remembrance. It's a very, very important day, and we want to make sure that is propelled to the front. So thank you very much. And we will see you on whatever Coast Guard Spectrum's next event is. We don't have it planned yet, so we're going to figure it out, and we'll let you know. Thank you very much for watching, and we appreciate everyone that tuned in. Thank you. Goodbye.